Before we drift into tonight's tale of the entire story of Princess Bubblegum, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Long before the Candy Kingdom stood proud with its cheerful streets and gumdrop towers, the world of Ooh was scarred and broken. The Mushroom War had left the land silent, a place haunted by the shadows of machines and the whispers of radiation. Out of this wasteland, new life began to stir. Strange, whimsical, and sometimes frightening forms took shape from the remains of what once was. And in the quiet heart of this ruined earth, the essence of candy began to breathe. Princess Bubblegum was not born as most beings are. She was formed from a living mass of pink bubblegum, shaped by unseen hands of fate, by elemental magic, and by the desperate will of the world to survive. In some tellings, she is a child of the Candy Elemental line, a successor to an ancient lineage that embodied sweetness, nourishment, and joy. But in truth, her existence is something stranger. She is a patchwork of science and sorcery, a miracle that arrived when Ooh needed her most. Imagine the scene for a moment, the air heavy with the scent of ash, the sky dim and uncertain, and yet, in that silence, a figure begins to rise. The soft glow of pink, the glimmer of eyes opening for the very first time. Bonnibel Bubblegum comes into being not in a cradle, not in a family's arms, but in the midst of chaos. Her first breath taken in a world already reshaped by tragedy. This origin matters deeply to her character. She is sweetness born of bitterness, laughter born from ruin. Her very body is made of candy, a symbol of joy, yet her heart carries the memory of war and loss. She is both fragile and enduring, as candy can melt and crumble, but also endure when reshaped again and again. From her earliest days, she was not alone. Fragments of gum and sugar began to shift and move at her command, forming crude shapes that would one day become her people. These early candy beings were simple, barely more than moving lumps of sugar, but to her they were companions. She was both their creator and their caretaker, shaping them patiently, piece by piece, into something more. In this way, Bubblegum's role as ruler began long before there was a throne or a crown. She was always a guardian, always a mother figure to the candy life around her. Yet even as her kingdom slowly grew, a question lingered in the air. Was she truly alive in the same way as the others? Was she a person with a soul, or simply an extension of elemental magic? In Adventure Time's quiet way, the show leaves this open, allowing us to see her both as a scientist and as something almost divine. She is her own creation, but also the inheritor of something ancient. As the candy elemental, Bubblegum represents a force of balance. Alongside other elementals like Flame Princess tied to fire, or Slime Princess to her gelatinous dominion, Bubblegum carries the weight of sweetness and life. These forces are not just playful archetypes, but echoes of the world's attempt to rebuild itself after collapse. Each elemental holds within them a fragment of the planet's new order, and Bubblegum's piece is the power of community, kindness, and creation. But sweetness alone is never enough. From the very beginning, Bubblegum showed a sharpness beneath her smile. To survive in the broken landscape of Ooh, she could not simply be gentle. She learned quickly that protection often required control, that building a safe world for her candy children meant being vigilant, careful, and sometimes cold. This is why, even in her earliest days, we see in her a tension that would define her story. She is both mother and monarch, both protector and scientist. When we imagine her standing among the first gumdrop hills, looking out at a horizon of broken cities and distant mountains, we can sense that duality. She is a figure of pink light in a gray world, a child who carries the responsibility of an entire people. The ruins around her whisper of what once was, while the candy creatures at her side giggle with childlike innocence. She is caught between destruction and renewal, and in her hands rests the fragile promise of a brighter tomorrow. In many ways, her story is the story of Ooh itself. Out of war, new life. Out of chaos, order. Out of despair, hope. And yet, like the land she inhabits, Bubblegum is always in motion, never at rest. Her journey begins not with peace, but with rebuilding, with the steady shaping of something that can last. As her form stabilized and her consciousness deepened, Bonnibel began to understand her unusual place in the world. Unlike the other candy beings who depended entirely on her guidance, she had a mind that questioned, calculated, and sought meaning. She was not simply gum molded into shape. She was aware. She remembered the silence of her first moments, the weight of the ruined world, and the strange spark of intelligence that set her apart. These reflections gave her an unusual kind of solitude. She lived among her own creations, surrounded by laughter and sweetness, but she was never quite one of them. They were her children, bound to her very essence, and yet she carried an older, deeper awareness. It was as though the residue of the mushroom war still lingered in her, shaping her into something that could never be entirely innocent. This is why her eyes always seemed to carry more depth than her candy citizens could ever grasp. Legends in Ooh whisper that the elementals awaken when the balance of the world must be restored. If that is true, then Princess Bubblegum was not just born out of accident, but out of necessity. The broken earth called for guardians to embody its surviving forces. Fire burned, slime spread, ice hardened, and candy bloomed. Among these, she became the caretaker, the embodiment of life that nourishes. But being tied to sweetness does not mean being soft. Anyone who has tasted sugar knows that sweetness can be overwhelming, clinging, and even dangerous in its own way. This paradox sat quietly in her from the very beginning. As she grew, Bubblegum began to experiment with her own nature. She tested the limits of her candy body, how it stretched, healed, and reshaped itself. She learned that she could mold her form, create tools from her own essence, and even split off pieces of herself to form companions. These fragments were like younger siblings or children, each carrying some small spark of her, but never the full depth. They were lively, silly, and simple. And though they filled the empty halls of her early home with sound, they reminded her of her own difference. She was the mind among them, the queen without a throne. It is easy to imagine her in these early days, sitting under a broken billboard that once advertised candy bars. Its letters faded, while her gumdrop children danced nearby. The irony of the moment might have struck her even then that humanity's machines of war had nearly ended the world, yet candy, once seen as a simple indulgence, was now reborn as a kingdom's foundation. She may have smiled at that thought, or perhaps the smile came later, when she realized how much work lay ahead. As the decades stretched on, Bubblegum's control grew stronger. She began crafting not only simple citizens, but guardians of great strength. The gumball guardians, towering figures of candy stone with glowing eyes, were among her earliest and most enduring creations. To the outside world, they seemed like magical protectors who appeared suddenly. But to Bubblegum, they were carefully constructed pieces of her will, meant to ensure that the fragile peace she was building would not be shattered. Even then, her kingdom was not just a place of joy. It was a laboratory in disguise, a vast experiment in how to create order out of chaos. Every candy citizen was both a companion and a test of her power. Every structure she raised was both a home and a calculated defense. The Candy Kingdom was never simply a land of sweetness. It was a fortress, grown quietly in the shadow of destruction. And yet, despite her focus on control, Bubblegum carried within her an unshakable tenderness. She loved her people with the fierceness of a mother who has only one child. She watched over them at night, when the quiet of ooh deepened, and felt the strange warmth of responsibility settle in her chest. They were her creations, yes, but also her family. Their laughter gave her strength, and their safety gave her purpose. Still, the world around her was not empty. Beyond the borders of her budding kingdom, strange beings roamed. Mutants, magical creatures, and remnants of old human technology stirred restlessly in the wilderness. Bubblegum knew from her earliest years that her reign would never be uncontested. She would need to be clever, cautious, and sometimes unyielding to protect her people from the dangers of ooh. This foresight, born from chaos, would define the ruler she became. What makes her origin so compelling is that it blurs the line between accident and destiny. She was not born in a cradle, yet she carries the weight of a lineage that stretches back to the earliest forces of the world. She was not raised by parents, yet she learned to nurture with a devotion stronger than most families. She was not trained as a leader, yet she rose naturally to the role, because no one else could. Out of the ruins, out of the silence, Princess Bubblegum became a figure of both sweetness and steel, and her story began with that delicate balance. When we look back at those beginnings, it's easy to see the echoes that carry through her entire life. The tension between control and kindness, between science and love, between ruler and person. All of it began in those first days after the Mushroom War, when a girl of candy opened her eyes to a broken world and decided it could be rebuilt. As the Candy Kingdom began to take shape in the quiet corners of ooh, the world outside remained unpredictable. Vast forests had regrown over the ruins of fallen cities. Rivers had shifted their courses, carrying with them whispers of forgotten machines and bones. Strange creatures wandered, some kind and some dangerous, many warped by magic or mutation. For a young ruler, this was not a playground, but a proving ground. Bubblegum understood from the start that survival would not come from chance alone. It would require planning, vigilance, and sacrifice. Her earliest experiments were shaped by this need. Every candy citizen she formed was not just a companion, but a piece of her expanding vision. Peppermint Butler, one of her most loyal creations, came from this period. While his cheerful demeanor made him blend with the candy folk, something in his design reflected her curiosity about the darker arts of the world. He carried knowledge far beyond what one might expect from a peppermint candy, and his presence hinted at Bubblegum's awareness that light and shadow must coexist. In this way, the Candy Kingdom grew not only in number, but in character. Each being reflected a fragment of her thoughts, her desires, or her anxieties. Some were gentle and playful, meant to bring joy into a fragile world. Others, like the Gumball Guardians, stood as reminders that strength was necessary when joy was threatened. This dual nature became the essence of her reign. Her people laughed and danced, but behind their happiness was the unspoken truth that their queen was always calculating, always preparing. When we imagine Bubblegum in these early centuries, it is not as a child anymore, but as a young monarch. She walks through gumdrop streets she built herself, pausing to adjust a structure here, to mend a candy being there. To her, the city was alive, a living organism tied to her very essence. The walls pulsed with her design, the streets hummed with her intent. Every citizen's laughter was like an echo of her own heartbeat. But even in those first bright moments, hints of unease lingered. The world of Ooh was never still. Far beyond the borders of her domain, forces stirred. Ancient beings older than the Mushroom War watched quietly. Elemental rivals like the descendants of fire and slime rose in their own corners of the world. And somewhere in the distant dark, the Lich's presence began to press faintly against reality. Bubblegum may not have known these threats by name, but she could feel them, like static in the air, warning her that peace could not be trusted. This awareness pushed her further into the realm of science. She began to build laboratories beneath her kingdom, hidden chambers filled with experiments that few citizens would ever understand. Test tubes, glowing liquids, and complex machines clattered in the stillness of the night, while above, the streets rested in silence. These labs were her sanctuaries and her prisons. They allowed her to explore the limits of her candy body and the essence of her creations. But they also reminded her of the heavy burden she carried. No one else could lead. No one else could keep the kingdom safe. Her experiments were not always successful. Many early creations wandered too far from her vision. Some collapsed into sticky heaps of sugar and gum. Others developed strange personalities, unruly and unpredictable. Lemongrab, though created later, is a lasting example of what can go wrong when her ambition outpaces her control. But even these failures reveal an important truth about Bubblegum. She never stopped trying. Where another might have given up, she refined, adjusted, and began again. This persistence speaks to her origin. Born in chaos, she carried within her the certainty that survival requires endless adaptation. She could never afford to rest for too long. Each day brought the possibility of collapse, so each day demanded creation. The Candy Kingdom was not a finished product, but an ongoing experiment, always in need of her hand to guide it. And yet, in the quiet hours, there must have been moments when she wondered what it meant to exist in this way. Did she envy the simplicity of her citizens, who laughed without the weight of knowledge? Did she long for someone equal, someone who could stand beside her not as a subject but as a companion? These questions linger softly in her story. The show never gives us all the answers, but we can imagine the solitude of a queen who is also a scientist, a caretaker, and a child of elemental forces. What makes her origin especially poignant is how it mirrors the cycle of Ooh itself. Out of destruction came rebirth. Out of brokenness came creativity. And out of loneliness came community. Bubblegum embodies all of this. Her pink form is not just candy. It is the living memory of a world that refused to end. Every step she takes is a continuation of that defiance, proof that even in ruin, life insists on shaping something new. As she grew into her role, Bubblegum's presence began to ripple outward. Travelers who stumbled into the Candy Kingdom carried stories of a young ruler made of gum, surrounded by cheerful subjects and guarded by stone giants with glowing eyes. To some it sounded like a dream, to others a warning. A place so sweet and colorful could not exist without a price. And in truth, both were correct. The Candy Kingdom was a sanctuary, but it was also a fortress, its sweetness carefully protected by the mind of its queen. Still, within her people's eyes, she was more than a protector. She was their mother, their foundation, their guiding star. The simple candy folk saw only the warmth of her care, not the sleepless nights in her laboratories or the fears that haunted her thoughts. To them, she was Princess Bubblegum, the eternal sweetness who would always keep them safe. And perhaps that was enough for her in those days. to watch her people dance in the streets, to hear their laughter echo through the gumdrop towers, to know that her existence had given them life. These were the quiet rewards that balanced the burden of her crown. As the Candy Kingdom's foundations settled deeper into the earth, Bubblegum's own identity grew more defined. She was no longer the uncertain girl of gum rising out of chaos, but a young monarch with vision. Her mind was sharp, her resolve unwavering, yet still she carried the softness of her origins. This balance, the mingling of sweetness and steel, is what made her unique among the rulers of Oo. She did not conquer her land through force alone. She nurtured it into existence, shaping it patiently, almost tenderly, as though each gumdrop street and licorice lamppost were part of her own body. Still, there was no escaping the questions that followed her. Who was she, truly? A child of magic, a fragment of the elemental lineage, or something entirely new? The answers drifted like mist, never quite settling. Even Bubblegum herself may not have known. What she did understand, though, was that her purpose was tied to the survival of her people. She felt it deep in her very candy essence that to exist was to care, to protect, and to ensure that sweetness endured in a world that could be so bitter. At night, when her people slept, she would sometimes wander the edges of her kingdom. The gumdrop towers behind her glowed faintly in the moonlight, while the ruined horizons of old human cities loomed far away. In those moments, she was reminded of how fragile her peace was. The world could change again in an instant. The fires of war, the hunger of ancient creatures, the shifting tides of elemental power, all of it could sweep her people away. And so she returned to her laboratories, to her endless studies, chasing answers in glass tubes and glowing screens. She worked not out of vanity, but out of necessity. These long hours left their mark on her. Bubblegum learned quickly that knowledge can be a gift and a burden. To know too much is to see dangers others cannot. To understand too deeply is to recognize flaws that cannot be unseen. Her candy citizens laughed freely because they could not perceive the risks she saw every day. They were spared the burden of foresight, but she was not. This gave her reign a certain loneliness. She could share her joy, but rarely her fears. She could create companions, but none could truly understand the weight of her crown. And yet she pressed forward. That is the most striking quality of her origin story persistence. Time and again, Bubblegum faced setbacks, failed experiments, rebellious creations, the unending reminder that perfection is always just out of reach. But instead of surrender, she adapted. Where one creation faltered, another followed. Where one plan collapsed, she drew a new one. This resilience is what allowed her kingdom not only to survive, but to flourish. In reflecting on her beginnings, we also notice the shadows they cast across her future. The habit of control, born from the chaos of her birth, would stay with her always. The drive to protect by planning, by preparing, by creating, would sometimes harden into mistrust and secrecy. Her loneliness, sown in the early days when she had no true equal, would follow her through relationships and rivalries, but so too would her compassion. The love she felt for her candy people was genuine and deep, a reminder that even rulers forged from magic and science are capable of tenderness. When we step back, the picture of Bubblegum's origin is more than just the tale of one princess. It is a reflection of Oo itself. The world ended, yet life began again in forms both strange and beautiful. Out of devastation rose a figure of pink sweetness, who carried within her both the scars of the past and the hopes of the future. She is, in many ways, the perfect emblem of post-war Oo, playful on the surface, but beneath it layered with fear, strength, and the quiet determination to endure. Close your eyes and imagine her in those earliest days. A girl of candy, walking barefoot through a landscape still littered with broken machines, guiding her gumdrop children with gentle hands. Around her, the air is still heavy with silence, but where she walks, laughter begins to follow. Out of rubble, she raises towers. Out of loneliness, she creates community. Out of chaos, she shapes a kingdom that will one day stand among the brightest in Ooh. This is the beginning of Princess Bubblegum's story, not a tale of royal birth or noble inheritance, but of survival and creation. She is the child of ruin who became a queen of sweetness. She is the echo of the candy elemental line, yet something entirely her own. She is both scientist and sorceress, both mother and monarch. And from the very first moment she opened her eyes, she carried within her the quiet promise that Ooh would not only survive, but rebuild. Her reign was still young, her story still unwritten, but the seeds of everything to come, her triumphs, her mistakes, her bonds, and her burdens were already there, woven into the pink fabric of her being. The Candy Kingdom stood as proof of what she could achieve. And beyond its glowing towers, the vast, strange world of Ooh waited, filled with trials that would test her, allies who would shape her, and enemies who would challenge everything she believed in. For now, though, in this first chapter of her life, what matters most is the image of Bubblegum as she began. A girl of candy standing against the silence, looking into the distance with steady eyes, her kingdom small but alive, her future vast and uncertain. The sweetness of her presence was not a mask, but a light, guiding Ooh forward through the lingering shadows of the past. The Candy Kingdom did not appear all at once. It was not born with walls and castles, nor with parades and banners. It began like a garden, carefully tended by hands that were both patient and restless. Princess Bubblegum, still young in years but ancient in spirit, walked the soft hills of Ooh and imagined a place where her people could thrive without fear. She looked at the cracked earth and broken ruins of the past and envisioned streets filled with joy, towers glowing in the sun, and homes where candy folk could laugh without worry. This vision became her guiding star. Every step she took was toward that dream. In the beginning, the kingdom was little more than clusters of gumdrop huts and licorice fences, fragile against the wildness beyond. Her citizens, simple and childlike, often did not understand the dangers that surrounded them. They would wander too far into the forests or sing too loudly when predators roamed near. Bubblegum's role was not only to guide them, but to shield them, teaching through gentle words and quiet vigilance. The earliest streets were laid by her own hands, each stone chosen with care, each structure designed to last. She carved rivers to flow cleanly through the land, planting trees that bore sweet fruits to feed her people. It was not a kingdom yet, but it was a community, and that was enough for the moment. At night, lanterns made of hardened sugar lit the paths, their warm glow soft against the darkness. To her candy folk, it must have felt like living inside a dream. But Bubblegum knew dreams needed foundations. She had seen too much of the world's fragility to leave anything to chance. So as she built, she also fortified. The first gumball guardians were placed at the edges of the settlement, silent sentinels who watched with glowing eyes. They did not speak, but their presence gave comfort to the citizens and warning to intruders. In their stone faces, one could see Bubblegum's careful balance, the promise of safety, but also the reminder of vigilance. With time, the community began to resemble a kingdom. The candy folk looked to Bubblegum not only as their creator, but as their leader. They trusted her completely, their joy unshaken even when her experiments frightened them, or when her rules seemed strict. To them, her authority was natural, almost divine. She was the source of their existence, and her care was their shelter. For Bubblegum, this devotion was both a comfort and a burden. It meant she was never alone, but it also meant she could never falter. Every choice she made echoed in the lives of her people. It is easy to picture her in those years, standing at the heart of her growing settlement. Robes of pink trailing softly behind her, crown gleaming faintly in the sun. Around her, candy children laughed, and citizens bustled through streets that smelled of sugar and spice. From the outside, it must have looked like paradise, a fragile wonder carved out of a scarred land, and in many ways it was. But behind every smile, Bubblegum carried the weight of knowing how easily it could all collapse. Her scientific mind never rested. Between council meetings and nightly patrols, she returned to her laboratories, hidden beneath the castle foundations. There she worked tirelessly on ways to strengthen her kingdom, new forms of candy life, improved defenses, and experiments in sustainability. Every discovery was meant to give her people more stability, more resilience. But sometimes the results were unpredictable. Not every candy creation flourished. Some wandered aimlessly, others rebelled, and a few dissolved entirely. Bubblegum mourned these failures quietly, though she rarely showed her sorrow to the citizens above. They needed to see her as unshakable, and so she carried her grief alone. What makes this stage of her life so compelling is the tenderness with which she balanced creation and control. She was a scientist, yes, but she was also a mother. She celebrated her people's small joys, joining them at festivals, tasting their sweets, and smiling as they played. Yet she never stopped watching, never stopped calculating, because she understood that safety is never permanent. In Ooh, danger was always waiting just beyond the horizon. The rise of the Candy Kingdom was not just a triumph of architecture or invention. It was a triumph of spirit. It proved that even in a world reshaped by ruin, communities could bloom again. Bubblegum's people did not need to know the details of the Mushroom War, nor the dangers of radiation and ancient machines. They only needed to feel safe in the walls she built for them, and in her presence they did. To them, their princess was more than a ruler. She was the embodiment of their hope, the sweet certainty that life could still be joyful. And yet, as her streets grew busier and her towers taller, Bubblegum's solitude deepened. Surrounded by laughter, she still carried the quiet loneliness of a being who had no true equal. She had built a kingdom, but she herself remained apart from it, tied to it in ways her candy folk could never fully understand. This separation was not cruel or cold, but it was real. Her people belonged to her, but she did not entirely belong to them. As years passed, the Candy Kingdom's identity grew clearer. No longer just a settlement of gumdrop huts, it began to resemble a true city. Towers of hardened sugar rose against the sky, their surfaces catching sunlight and glowing like crystals. Bridges of caramel spanned quiet streams, and licorice archways marked the entrances to gardens filled with sweet blossoms. To travelers who stumbled across it, the sight must have seemed impossible, a place of color and laughter in a world still healing from the scars of war. But for Bubblegum, this blossoming was never a reason to rest. She saw the beauty of her creation, yes, but she also saw the cracks that might one day weaken it. A storm could wash away the softer structures. A wandering monster could break through the outer walls. Even a single mistake in her own experiments could endanger the very people she cherished. Her mind was always half in the present, half in the future, measuring risk against reward. Her candy citizens, however, were blissfully unaware of most of these worries. They lived in innocence, enjoying festivals of sweets and dances under the starlight. They trusted Bubblegum completely, never questioning her decisions, never doubting her care. Their lives were simple, filled with laughter and small joys, and this was exactly what Bubblegum wanted for them. If she carried the weight of caution, it was so that they did not have to. Among her earliest creations, certain figures began to stand out. Peppermint Butler became her most trusted aide, discreetly helping with matters of governance while carrying secrets that stretched far beyond the cheerful walls of the kingdom. Cinnamon Bun, though clumsy and naive, was a reminder of the unpredictability of her experiments, sometimes unstable, sometimes surprisingly wise. Each citizen reflected not only her skill, but also the unpredictability of life itself. They were pieces of her, yet also beings who would grow into their own roles. In this way, the Candy Kingdom became more than just an extension of Bubblegum. It became a culture. Songs were sung, stories were told, traditions slowly formed. The Candy folk celebrated their princess not only as their maker, but as their heart, their source of identity. To them, the kingdom was not merely a place to live. It was a home with roots that reached back to her very being. Their loyalty was unwavering, and their affection gave the kingdom its warmth. Yet the wider world could not be ignored. Beyond the candy walls, Ooh was alive with rival rulers and shifting powers. The Flame Kingdom smoldered with restless energy. The Slime Kingdom spread in its curious ways, and Ice King's frozen dominion drifted unpredictably with its lonely ruler. Bubblegum, though young, began to step carefully into this larger stage. She sought diplomacy where possible, recognizing that survival depended not only on her strength, but also on her ability to weave bonds across kingdoms. This was not always easy. Other rulers did not always take her seriously. Some saw her youth and her candy body as weakness, but they underestimated the mind behind her smile. Bubblegum's intelligence was formidable, her strategies precise. Where others relied on force, she relied on foresight. She could predict conflicts before they erupted. She could prepare defenses before danger arrived, and when pressed, she could be as unyielding as stone. Still, her diplomacy was often softened by kindness. She understood that ruling was not simply about survival, but about shaping relationships that could endure. To Flame Princess, she extended both caution and respect, wary of the destructive fire, but aware of its importance. To Slime Princess, she offered a balance of patience and firmness, knowing that the chaos of slime required boundaries. Even with the unpredictable Ice King, she managed a strange, careful distance, neither ally nor enemy, but something in between. Through these relationships, Bubblegum's role as a true monarch began to crystallize. She was no longer just the caretaker of a small candy community. She was a recognized power in Ooh, her voice carrying weight in the quiet politics that shaped the land. And yet she never let this recognition separate her from her people. To the candy folk, she remained their princess, still walking among them, still guiding them with the same steady care. What makes this part of her story so engaging is the way it highlights her growth. She had risen from the ruins of the Mushroom War, shaped herself into a leader, and built a kingdom that reflected both her mind and her heart. But even as her influence spread, she never lost sight of her origin. She knew that everything she built was fragile, that every wall and every citizen was precious and vulnerable. This knowledge made her reign both strong and tender, both cautious and deeply compassionate. In quiet moments, she must have reflected on how far she had come. From a lone figure of candy rising in silence, she had created a city of laughter. From the ashes of war, she had woven sweetness. Yet she also knew the story was not finished. The Candy Kingdom was still young, and the world around it was vast and unpredictable. Greater challenges lay ahead, and she would need to prepare for them with the same care that had brought her this far. As the Candy Kingdom settled into its place among the lands of Owl, its uniqueness began to draw attention. Wandering adventurers would sometimes arrive at its gates, dazzled by the sight of gumdrop turrets and peppermint paths. Some came in peace, others with curiosity, and a few with greed. Bubblegum welcomed those who respected her people, offering them shelter and sweets, but she remained cautious of anyone who looked at her kingdom as a prize. For behind its soft colors and cheerful voices, the Candy Kingdom was fragile, and she knew it could be broken by the wrong kind of guest. To protect her borders, Bubblegum refined the defenses she had begun in the kingdom's earliest days. The Gumball Guardian stood taller, their stone bodies etched with new runes of power, their glowing eyes capable of scanning threats from afar. These silent watchers became a symbol not only of safety, but of deterrence. Few would dare to challenge a kingdom guarded by such towering protectors. Yet even with these measures, Bubblegum continued to experiment, creating new systems and hidden defenses, weaving her science into the very architecture of the city. In her mind, peace was never permanent. It was something to be actively preserved layer by layer. Her people, blissful in their innocence, did not see the depth of her planning. They enjoyed festivals and candy squares, where licorice strings hung like banners and sugar-fueled fireworks lit the sky. They sang songs of their princess, their voices carrying warmth into the night. To them, the kingdom was paradise, and their trust in Bubblegum was absolute. What they did not see were the hours she spent in her laboratories, alone with her notes and her quiet worries, shaping contingency after contingency. It was not paranoia, but foresight, born from the chaos of her origin. Still, even as she prepared for every danger, Bubblegum understood the importance of joy. She knew her people thrived not only on safety, but on celebration, and she often joined their festivities with a smile. She danced at their gatherings, shared in their sweets, and spoke to them with a tenderness that reminded them she was not a distant monarch, but a part of their lives. This balance of ruler and companion, a protector and participant, gave her reign a rare harmony. As her city grew, so too did her understanding of governance. It was not enough to create life and guard it. She had to nurture culture, to provide her citizens with meaning. The Candy Kingdom became more than just walls and watchtowers. It became a place with traditions and stories of its own. Citizens began to tell tales of their origins, of how their princess had raised them from sweetness and light. They painted murals, sang songs, and crafted rituals, all centered around the figure of Bubblegum herself. In their eyes, she was more than a queen. She was a living legend. And yet, legends can be lonely. The deeper her citizens adored her, the more isolated Bubblegum felt. They could not see her doubts, nor her moments of weakness. They did not understand the burdens of her experiments, or the fear that lingered every time she looked beyond the walls. She carried those truths quietly, presenting to her people the image they needed. Steady, bright, unshakable. Inside, though, she was still that girl of candy who had first opened her eyes in silence, trying to make sense of a broken world. Beyond the kingdom, Bubblegum's influence grew steadily. Other rulers began to recognize her, not just as a caretaker of candy folk, but as a strategist worth respecting. When disputes rose among kingdoms, her voice was often one of reason. She had little interest in conquest, but she understood the importance of balance. The Flame Kingdom could not be allowed to spread unchecked, nor the chaotic Slime Kingdom left entirely unobserved. Bubblegum positioned herself as both mediator and guardian, shaping the politics of Ooh with her steady hand. This was not without risk. Some saw her interventions as meddling, others as veiled ambition. But Bubblegum was not swayed by opinion. She acted because she believed it necessary, and she trusted her vision above all else. It was a trait that would serve her well, but also lead her into conflicts in the years to come. For now, though, it was enough to ensure that the Candy Kingdom had a place at the table, that its voice was heard in the greater symphony of Ooh. Through all of this, Bubblegum's scientific pursuits continued. She created new candy citizens, refining their personalities and roles. Some were designed for joy, others for stability, and a few for purposes only she understood. Each one added to the complexity of her kingdom, making it both more vibrant and more fragile. For though her creations were many, they all remained tied to her essence. If she faltered, so too might they. This unbreakable bond gave her reign both power and peril. It is here that we see the essence of the Candy Kingdom's rise. It was not simply built of sugar and gum. It was built of Bubblegum's will, her endless energy, her unyielding hope. Every tower, every citizen, every defense was an extension of her. And because of this, the kingdom stood as both a sanctuary and a reflection of its princess. Sweet on the surface, complex beneath, resilient, yet delicate. When we imagine her walking through the streets at dusk, the lanterns glowing gently, her citizens waving happily as she passes, it is easy to see the kingdom as a dream. Yet behind her calm smile lies the truth of her journey, that it took vigilance, sacrifice, and unending care to create such a dream. She bore that weight without complaint, because to her it was the only way forward. As the Candy Kingdom entered its first true age of stability, Bubblegum began to see the fruits of her labor unfold in quiet, almost tender ways. The streets she had carved by hand were now busy with daily life. Candy citizens traded sweets in the markets, children ran laughing across gumdrop courtyards, and musicians strummed songs that echoed through licorice archways. What had once been a vision in her mind now lived and breathed around her. It was a paradise built on sweetness, yet one that owed everything to the vigilance of its princess. She often watched her people from the castle balcony at twilight, the skies painted with the soft colors of Ooh's strange sunsets. The sound of their laughter reached her ears, and for a moment, it would almost feel as though her burdens had lifted. But even then her gaze drifted outward to the forests and wastelands beyond, where dangers always lurked unseen. Peace within the walls did not erase the truth that the world outside was unpredictable. And so, even as she celebrated her people's joy, Bubblegum returned to her laboratories at night, continuing the endless work of preparation. It was during this period that her leadership style crystallized. She learned to balance her two roles with remarkable grace. To her people, she was the warm-hearted princess who walked among them, sharing in their games and joining their festivals. But in the solitude of her studies, she was the unflinching scientist, testing boundaries, creating solutions, and sometimes making decisions too difficult for anyone else to bear. This duality defined her reign. Half mother, half monarch, both halves inseparable. Her creations reflected this same balance. Some were designed to bring joy, cheerful beings who made life brighter for the candy folk. Others were crafted for utility or defense, like the guardians and specialized citizens who maintained order. And a rare few were experiments that revealed the darker edges of her curiosity, beings who sometimes strayed from her intended design. The Candy Kingdom was, in truth, a living gallery of her ideas, each citizen a thread in the tapestry of her vision. As the kingdom flourished, word of its existence spread farther. Travelers told tales of a land where candy walked and spoke, where a pink princess ruled with both wisdom and warmth. To outsiders, it sounded like a fairy tale, too whimsical to be real. Yet those who visited carried proof in their eyes, and soon the Candy Kingdom was no longer just a hidden wonder of ooh. It was a recognized power, its influence stretching quietly into the affairs of other lands. This recognition came with challenges. Rival rulers eyed the Candy Kingdom with suspicion. Some saw its cheerfulness as naive, while others feared its growing strength. Bubblegum responded not with aggression, but with careful diplomacy. She met other monarchs with patience, balancing caution with kindness, and slowly carved a place for her people in the fabric of Ooh's politics. Though she preferred peace, she was never blind to the reality that alliances could shift, and that caution was the truest form of protection. For her Candy citizens, little of this mattered. Their lives continued much as before, filled with sweets and laughter. To them, the outside world was a distant rumor. Their princess was their shield, and that was enough. They trusted her without hesitation, never realizing how much she sacrificed behind the scenes to keep their innocence intact. Bubblegum bore this responsibility willingly, but it deepened the solitude that had always followed her. She was surrounded by her people, yet set apart from them, bound by the knowledge she carried and the decisions only she could make. It is this solitude that gives the rise of the Candy Kingdom its quiet poignancy. The sweetness of her people's joy was real, but it rested on foundations of vigilance, foresight, and sleepless nights. Bubblegum understood better than anyone that kingdoms are not built by chance. They are shaped by endless care, by unspoken sacrifices, by the resolve of those who refuse to let their vision collapse. When we look at the Candy Kingdom in these early days, we see more than just sugar towers and gumdrop streets. We see a reflection of Bubblegum herself, bright and cheerful on the surface. But beneath that sweetness lies complexity, strength, caution, and an unyielding will. The kingdom's rise was not simply the story of a people finding a home. It was the story of one girl of candy refusing to let chaos have the final word. And so, as the Candy Kingdom entered its first golden age, the stage was set for everything that would follow. Bubblegum had built a sanctuary out of ruin, but the world of Ooh was vast, and peace within her walls did not guarantee peace beyond them. New challenges waited in the shadows, new relationships would test her heart, and new responsibilities would stretch her vision even further. For now, though, the image is gentle. The princess stands on her balcony, the glow of lanterns spreading across her city, the laughter of her people rising like music into the twilight. She watches over them with steady eyes, carrying both pride and worry in her heart. The Candy Kingdom has risen, alive and strong, but its future is still fragile, still unfolding. And she knows, deep down, that her journey as its protector has only just begun. The Candy Kingdom stood tall now, its walls sturdy, and its people joyful. Yet Princess Bubblegum's mind was never content with what already existed. She had been born from the unpredictable fusion of magic and science, and from her earliest days, she carried within her a hunger to understand. Knowledge to her was more than curiosity, was survival. Every page she filled with formulas, every experiment she set into motion, was another shield raised between her people and the dangers of Ooh. Her laboratories became the hidden heart of her kingdom. Beneath the laughter of the candy streets, below the glowing towers and sugar gardens, lay halls of glass and stone where machines hummed quietly and strange mixtures bubbled in the dark. To most of her citizens, these places were mysteries. They only knew that their princess descended there often, her robes brushing the stairwell, her mind already far ahead. When she returned, her eyes carried both exhaustion and fire, proof that her nights had been long but fruitful. Science was her tool, but it was also her burden. With every discovery came a new choice, and with every choice came consequences she could not always predict. She created marvels that helped her kingdom flourish, systems of irrigation to keep their gardens alive, protective devices hidden in the walls, even new forms of candy life to join the community. Yet alongside these triumphs came mistakes, creations that strayed from her intentions. The line between invention and responsibility grew thinner with each passing year. Lemongrab is one of the clearest examples of this duality. Crafted from her own hands, he was meant to be a loyal protector, another piece of her vision for safety and order. But something in his design was unstable. His shrill voice echoed through the halls, his temper sharp, his loneliness unbearable. Bubblegum gave him life, but she could not give him peace. To her, he was both a reminder of her brilliance and her flaws, a being who reflected the weight of her choices. She did not turn away from him, though. Even when his rule of Lemongrab spiraled into cruelty, she remained bound to him by the knowledge that she was his creator. It was her responsibility to correct what had gone wrong. This is what defined Bubblegum more than anything, the refusal to abandon her creations, even when they caused her pain. Each experiment was a piece of her, and she could not simply walk away. To her, science was not a detached pursuit. It was deeply personal, tied to the lives of those around her. And so, when mistakes arose, she bore the consequences herself, quietly adding them to the weight already on her shoulders. The citizens of the Candy Kingdom rarely saw this side of their princess. To them, she was steady, smiling, and endlessly capable. They did not know the hours she spent calculating equations that might prevent disaster. They did not hear the sighs that escaped her when an experiment collapsed into failure. They only knew that she always returned to them with solutions, that she always seemed to know what to do. This was the mask she wore for their sake, and though it protected them, it deepened her solitude. It is worth pausing here to reflect on the way Adventure Time presents her science. Unlike the sterile laboratories of human history, Bubblegum's science is woven with whimsy and wonder. Test tubes glow in pink and blue, machines hum with fantastical designs, and her inventions often blur the line between toy and tool. Yet beneath this playful surface lies a seriousness that cannot be ignored. Her world may be colorful, but her intentions are clear: to keep her people alive in a land that is anything but safe. Her knowledge extended far beyond candy biology. She studied the remnants of pre-war technology, unearthing machines that hummed with forgotten power. She learned of chemistry and physics, of magic that could be bent through formulas, of biology that could be reshaped into new forms of life. Every field of science she touched became another thread in her vast web of understanding. Few in Ooh could match her intellect, and fewer still could grasp how much she saw when she looked at the world. But this brilliance came with a shadow. The more she understood, the more she felt compelled to control. Knowledge showed her the dangers lurking ahead, and responsibility demanded that she act. Yet control, once taken, is hard to let go. Bubblegum began to build not only systems of protection, but systems of oversight, ensuring that nothing within her kingdom strayed too far beyond her grasp. To her, this was care. To others, it sometimes seemed like strictness. The sweetness of her rule was tempered by the sharpness of order. Still, her heart never strayed from its core. Every rule she set, every device she constructed, every citizen she created, all of it was for love. She may not have shown it in obvious ways, but her devotion to her people ran deeper than anything else in her life. She was their princess, their protector, their scientist mother, and she carried that title with quiet pride. Even when her methods were questioned, her purpose was clear. She would bear the burden of science, of power, and of responsibility, so that her citizens could live freely in the sweetness of their days. Bubblegum's relationship with her experiments revealed the depth of her character. She never approached science as a distant pursuit of curiosity, nor as a game. To her, every invention carried the weight of lives attached to it. When she shaped new candy being, she did not see them as numbers in an equation, but as souls who would walk her streets, sing her songs, and call her princess. This made her triumphs more meaningful, but it also made her failures more painful. Take the case of her many unfinished candy creations. Some were too unstable to live long, melting into sticky puddles before they could even speak. Others grew too strange, too wild, with personalities that disrupted the harmony of the kingdom. Bubblegum often quietly dismantled these failures, or stored them away in hidden chambers where they would not frighten her citizens. She rarely spoke of them, but their existence weighed heavily on her. They were reminders that creation is never simple, and that responsibility does not vanish when an experiment goes wrong. Her approach to science also stretched far beyond her own borders. Bubblegum often studied the strange phenomena of ooh itself, the stars, the magic, the unusual mutations that filled the forests and rivers. To her, knowledge was not only a tool for defense, but also a way of understanding the world she had inherited. She collected samples, charted observations, and filled journals with notes that stretched from candy biology to cosmic forces. In these writings, we see not just a ruler protecting her people, but a mind endlessly reaching for truth. Yet with every step forward, she seemed to grow more isolated. Her candy citizens could not understand her calculations, nor the weight of her discoveries. Even her closest allies often struggled to keep pace with her intellect. Finn admired her, but he was too young to grasp the scope of her burdens. Marceline cared for her, but their histories were tangled in ways that sometimes made closeness difficult. Peppermint Butler, loyal as he was, carried his own secrets, and so, in the deepest hours of the night, Bubblegum worked alone, her face lit by the glow of her machines, her thoughts wandering to places few could follow. This solitude made her stern. It is why she often appeared cold when dealing with matters of safety. To her, kindness without foresight could be dangerous. She could not allow sentiment to cloud her judgment, because the price of a mistake would be her people's lives. This is why she sometimes kept secrets from her citizens, why she sometimes made choices that others could not understand. It was not because she lacked compassion, but because she carried more responsibility than anyone else. Lemongrab's rebellion showed this clearly. When he turned against her, ruling his own land with cruelty and paranoia, Bubblegum faced a painful truth, that even her creations could resist her intentions. She did not simply destroy him or abandon him. She tried again, giving him companionship in the form of another Lemongrab, hoping that shared experience might soften his loneliness. It did not work as she had hoped, and yet she continued to intervene, refusing to leave him to ruin himself completely. This is the paradox of her science. It granted her immense power, but it also bound her to every consequence of that power, no matter how messy or painful. To the outside world, her work often seemed wondrous. Visitors to the Candy Kingdom marveled at her machines, at the seamless blend of magic and technology that filled her laboratories. To them, she was not only a ruler, but a genius whose creations bordered on the miraculous. But to Bubblegum herself, these marvels were never enough. She always saw the flaws, the risks, the ways they might one day collapse. Her perfectionism was endless, driven not by vanity, but by fear. If she stopped improving, stopped building, stopped planning, then disaster might find the cracks she had overlooked. This constant vigilance left little space for rest. Where others slept peacefully, she stayed awake, drawing plans, refining formulas, watching gauges flicker in the dark. Her candy body did not tire the way a human body would, but her spirit carried exhaustion all the same. The weight of knowing too much, of seeing too far ahead, pressed down on her, and still she carried it, because to her there was no other choice. She was the princess. She was the scientist. She was the guardian. And every breath she took belonged not just to herself, but to her people. The deeper Bubblegum fell into her work, the more her reign revealed a delicate tension between progress and control. To her, knowledge was a shield, but to her people, it sometimes appeared as mystery. They could not see why their princess insisted on rules about where they could wander, or why she kept certain chambers of the castle locked, or why she occasionally vanished for long hours beneath the city. To the candy folk, she was their caretaker, and caretakers were to be trusted. They accepted her boundaries with a childlike faith. Yet beneath that trust was the truth that she ruled not only through love, but through the unseen hand of science. She did not abuse this trust. Every choice she made, even the harsh ones, was born from devotion. When the threat of the Lich hung over Ooh, Bubblegum prepared tirelessly, her laboratories glowing brighter each night with defensive work. She studied the movements of magic, the essence of life itself, building countermeasures for an enemy she knew could not be fought by swords alone. Her mind became the kingdom's greatest weapon, sharper than steel, stronger than stone. But she carried this power with solemnity, aware that mistakes in her hands could be catastrophic. Some of her creations embodied this fragile balance. The Gumball Guardians, once silent sentinels, were reworked with layers of technology that allowed them to detect threats beyond what any citizen could see. They became more than statues. They were watchful, intelligent, almost alive. And yet their very presence was a reminder that Bubblegum trusted vigilance over chance, that peace to her was never passive, but always guarded. Other experiments showed a softer side. Bubblegum often designed candy pets, or small companions, whose only purpose was to bring joy. These were not soldiers nor tools, but gifts to her people. Evidence that her science was not only about defense, but also about happiness. Yet even these lighter creations carried her touch of calculation. A pet might soothe loneliness. A toy might calm restlessness. Each experiment, even the playful ones, served a purpose in the delicate system of her kingdom. This dual nature became clearer as her story unfolded. To allies like Finn, Bubblegum sometimes seemed too strict, too unwilling to leave things to chance. He believed in heart, in courage, in the unpredictable spark of heroism. She believed in preparation, in structure, in carefully measured outcomes. Their bond grew stronger with time, but this difference never disappeared. To Finn, she was brilliant, but distant. To Bubblegum, Finn was brave, but reckless. And between them lay a friendship that reflected the balance of their world, the spontaneity of adventure and the caution of science. Her relationship with Marceline revealed something deeper. Marceline, with her centuries of experience, understood Bubblegum's burdens more than most. She saw the loneliness behind the princess's calculations, the longing hidden beneath her perfectionism. Their bond, shaped by history and tension, carried both conflict and tenderness. Where others saw only a ruler, Marceline saw a person who longed for connection, but felt bound by duty. In Marceline's presence, Bubblegum sometimes allowed herself to set aside the mask, if only briefly, showing the vulnerability that her citizens could never see. Still, Responsibility always pulled her back. For every moment of closeness, there was a reminder that her work could not pause. The kingdom needed her to be more than human, more than candy. It needed her to be constant, reliable, unshakable. And so she returned to her laboratories, to her books and machines, to the quiet glow of glass tubes and chalkboards filled with formulas. Her science was her language, the way she spoke to the world, the way she shaped its future. The moral weight of her power is one of the most fascinating parts of her story. She knew she had the ability to create life, to alter bodies, to build machines that could change the course of Ooh, yet she never treated this casually. Each decision haunted her. Each creation demanded her care. It is why she often seemed controlling, because to her every loose thread could unravel everything she had built. In her mind, freedom without boundaries was not kindness. It was danger. Adventure Time frames this not as simple heroism or villainy, but as complexity. Bubblegum is both the nurturing mother of her people and the exacting scientist who refuses to let go of control. She loves deeply, but her love is expressed through vigilance, through preparation, through a refusal to leave her people vulnerable. This is why she sometimes clashes with others, why she sometimes seems hard to understand. Yet beneath it all, her actions are driven by the same force, the desire to protect. Imagine her in those long nights, the castle quiet, her citizens asleep, and the hum of her machines filling the air. She adjusts dials with steady hands, her eyes scanning notes filled with elegant script. Outside, the city dreams of sweetness, unaware of the dangers being held at bay by the quiet work of their princess. This is the heart of Bubblegum's story in this stage of her life. Science is love, power is burden, responsibility is the constant shadow she cannot escape. For all her caution, Princess Bubblegum never allowed fear to paralyze her. If anything, fear was her fuel. It sharpened her mind, it kept her vigilant, and it gave her the determination to solve problems before they ever reached her people. Her laboratories were not simply workshops of curiosity. They were armories of foresight. Each formula she tested, each device she refined, was another way of keeping her citizens safe from a world they could not comprehend. At times, though, the boundary between safety and control blurred. Bubblegum believed that protecting her kingdom meant guiding every detail of its life. To her, the candy folk were like children, innocent and vulnerable, unable to defend themselves against the harshness of Ooh. This led her to make decisions without their knowledge, to shape their lives quietly from behind the curtain of her authority. It was not malice, but love, a fierce, consuming love that sometimes left little room for trust. Her people adored her, yet they did not always realize how deeply she managed every thread of their world. This is the paradox that defines Bubblegum. Her science empowered her to do wonders. She created life. She built defenses. She uncovered truths hidden since the Mushroom War. But that same science made her feel the weight of every possible failure. She could not allow herself to step back, because stepping back meant risking everything she had built. And so her reign grew more orderly, her hand more present, her mind more restless. The Candy Kingdom thrived, but its princess carried loneliness like a shadow. Lemongrab remained a painful emblem of this struggle. He was not evil in the way of villains, nor gentle in the way of her candy folk. He was a reminder that creation is unpredictable, that even with the best intentions, outcomes can escape control. Bubblegum's attempts to guide him, to mend what she had made, show how deeply she took responsibility for her power. She never disowned him, even when his rule was unbearable. She intervened, she tried again, she shouldered the cost. Lemongrab's cries echoed the flaw of her science, but also the compassion of her heart. And so her story in the stage is not one of conquest, but of stewardship. She did not seek to expand her borders, to rule Ooh with force. She sought to perfect her own world, to weave her knowledge into a tapestry strong enough to withstand the chaos beyond. Her power was not the fire of a warrior or the might of a conqueror. It was the quiet, relentless force of a mind unwilling to let go, of a heart that bore every burden so others did not have to. What makes this chapter of her life so soothing to reflect upon is the imagery it conjures. Picture her castle at night, its pink spires glowing faintly under the stars. Inside, the citizens sleep peacefully, dreaming of sugar and light. And beneath them, their princess moves among glowing machines, her crown tilted forward as she studies her notes. Her footsteps echo softly. Her voice hums as she tests equations, and her hands never tire. The city above her rests because she does not. This rhythm, this quiet cycle of sacrifice, is the melody of her reign. As Adventure Time shows us again and again, Bubblegum's science is not cold. It is warm with intention, alive with purpose. She may appear stern, she may hide her emotions, but at the heart of every invention lies her devotion to her people. Even when she makes mistakes, even when her choices create conflict, the core of her actions is love. It is not the gentle, carefree love of a friend or sibling. It is the fierce, protective love of someone who believes she alone must hold the weight of the world. And so the segment of her story we call Science, Power, and Responsibility is less about experiments than about identity. It shows us who Bubblegum truly is. A creator who cannot stop creating, a leader who cannot stop planning, a guardian who cannot stop guarding. Her candy body may sparkle with sweetness, but her soul is heavy with the knowledge that everything she builds rests upon her alone. By the time this chapter of her reign reached its height, the Candy Kingdom had become more than a place of sweetness. It was a fortress of intellect, a sanctuary guarded by both science and devotion. And Bubblegum herself had become more than a princess. She was the scientist queen, the protector, the caretaker whose mind and heart were woven into every corner of her land. As we leave this part of her tale, the image is calm and clear. The city hums softly in the night, the lanterns casting warm light over candy streets. Above it all, a young ruler of gum and brilliance stands watch, her eyes never leaving the horizon. For she knows that responsibility is endless, and that science is not a pastime, but a promise to her people that she will never stop building, never stop guarding, never stop loving them in her own tireless way. Princess Bubblegum's reign was not defined by solitude alone. Though she often stood apart, her story is also shaped by the bond she formed and the conflicts that arose when her love of control met the unpredictability of others. These relationships reveal the most human side of her character. They show us her heart, a heart capable of great tenderness, yet one that sometimes struggled to trust, to let go, to simply be. Among her most enduring connections is her bond with Finn the human. Finn looked up to her with the wide-eyed devotion of a young hero who saw in her both wisdom and grace. To him, she was more than a princess. She was an ideal, someone who embodied the justice and care he hoped to live by. He brought her gifts, sang her songs, and in his earliest years dreamed of winning her love. Bubblegum, for her part, cared deeply for Finn, but not in the way he imagined. To her, he was a brave friend, a symbol of innocence in a world that had lost so much. She admired his courage, but she also worried for his safety, never forgetting how fragile human life could be. Their bond grew complicated as time passed. Finn's feelings matured, and he began to see the distance between them more clearly. Bubblegum, centuries old and burdened with responsibility, could never return his affection in the way he wished, yet she never dismissed him, never looked down on him. Instead, she guided him gently toward growth, teaching him through their adventures the value of compassion and patience. Their relationship is tender not because it fulfilled Finn's dreams, but because it became something stronger. A friendship rooted in respect, tested by disappointment, but never broken. If Finn represented innocence and courage, Marceline the Vampire Queen represented something far more complex. The history between Bubblegum and Marceline stretched back centuries, tangled with old wounds and unspoken emotions. They had once been close, perhaps closer than anyone else in Bubblegum's long life. But time, pride, and their own stubborn natures pushed them apart. What remained was a bond filled with tension, sharp words exchanged, small acts of care hidden beneath banter, and memories that never quite faded. Marceline's wild spirit clashed with the Bubblegum's need for control, where Marceline valued freedom, spontaneity, and music that echoed her emotions. Bubblegum valued structure, precision, and order. This difference often drew them into conflict, yet it was also what made their connection powerful. Marceline reminded Bubblegum of the humanity she sometimes buried beneath science and duty. And Bubblegum, in turn, reminded Marceline of the importance of care, of stability, of roots. They circled each other across the seasons of Adventure Time, sometimes at odds, sometimes united, always tethered by something neither could deny. There are moments in their story where the mask slips. Bubblegum's sternness softens, Marceline's defenses lower, and we see the affection that lingers between them. In the quiet of shared songs and the vulnerability of near loss, they reveal how deeply they matter to one another. Their relationship is not simple. It is messy, layered, filled with silence as much as with words, but it is real. And for Bubblegum, who so often carried her burdens alone, Marceline became the rare person who could see her not just as a princess, but as Bonnibel. Beyond these two central figures, Bubblegum's web of bonds stretched across the kingdoms of Ooh. Her diplomacy with Flame Princess is a story of both caution and respect. Flame Princess carried within her the destructive power of fire, a force that could easily consume the fragile candy structures. Bubblegum, ever the strategist, first approached her with suspicion. She even attempted to monitor her closely, worried that her fiery nature might bring ruin. Yet over time, Bubblegum learned to treat Flame Princess not as a danger to be contained, but as a ruler in her own rights. Their relationship shifted from wariness to a kind of mutual acknowledgement, proof of Bubblegum's ability to grow, to adjust her view when confronted with strength. Slime Princess, though often played for humor, also reflected Bubblegum's struggles with diplomacy. The chaotic, shifting nature of Slime clashed with Bubblegum's desire for order, leading to a dynamic that required patience. Bubblegum handled it with firmness wrapped in courtesy, never letting her guard down, but never dismissing the worth of another kingdom either. In these interactions, we see her role not only as a scientist or caretaker, but as a stateswoman, weaving threads of connection that kept Ooh from fracturing further. Even her strange relationship with the Ice King fits into this tapestry. Simon, hidden beneath his crown's madness, was someone Bubblegum treated with a careful distance. She never dismissed him entirely, perhaps recognizing the tragedy beneath his erratic behavior. But she also never allowed him too close, wary of the instability he carried. Their bond was defined by caution, a reminder of Bubblegum's ability to balance empathy with responsibility. Each of these connections, Finn, Marceline, Flame Princess, Slime Princess, Ice King reveals a different side of Bubblegum. Through them, we see not only her intelligence, but her heart, her struggles, and her growth. She is not a perfect ruler, nor a perfect friend. She makes mistakes. She overreaches. She misjudges. Yet in each bond there is a spark of sincerity, a glimpse of the girl beneath the crown, trying to navigate a world of love and conflict while carrying the endless weight of her kingdom. The weight of Bubblegum's relationships often revealed itself during moments of crisis. For Finn, her protective instincts sometimes placed her in conflict with his desire for independence. She admired his bravery, but she also knew that rushing into danger without a plan could cost him dearly. There were times when she withheld information from him, convinced that she alone should bear the risks. To Finn, this secrecy stung. To Bubblegum, it was necessary. Their friendship endured because both came to understand the other's intentions, but it was a lesson learned slowly through trial, disappointment, and forgiveness. With Marceline, the conflicts ran deeper. They had known each other for centuries, and with such history came scars. Marceline accused Bubblegum of caring more for her kingdom than for their bond. Bubblegum, in turn, believed that Marceline's carefree spirit often dismissed the responsibilities that weighed heavily on her. When the two clashed, their words cut sharp, yet beneath them lingered the echo of affection. In those rare moments when they set aside pride, when music softened the silence between them, we saw how much they longed for understanding. Their story is not a simple tale of friendship or romance, but of two souls learning again and again how to meet in the middle. Bubblegum's diplomacy with the Flame Princess showed a different kind of conflict. At first, she underestimated her, treating her like a volatile spark that needed constant supervision. This mistrust was not born from cruelty, but from calculation. Flame was dangerous, and Bubblegum feared what unchecked fire could do to her fragile, candy walls. Yet over time, she came to see the fire not only as a threat, but as a force of strength. She recognized Flame Princess's determination, her desire to rule with fairness, her own struggle to contain the destructive potential within. In this recognition, the distance between them lessened. Bubblegum learned to respect her not as a child of fire to be watched, but as a fellow ruler. The Candy Kingdom itself often became the setting where these bonds and conflicts collided. Finn's heroics, Marceline's music, Flame Princess's fiery will all left their marks upon its candy streets. Each visitor to her realm challenged Bubblegum to reconsider her boundaries, to test the balance between control and trust. Sometimes she leaned too heavily on order, and her friends reminded her of the need for freedom. Sometimes she leaned too heavily on secrecy, and her allies reminded her of the value of openness. Through these lessons, she grew, not only as a ruler, but as a person. Even with her closest citizens, bonds were layered with complexity. Peppermint Butler, outwardly loyal and polite, held knowledge of the dark arts that rivaled her own brilliance. Their relationship was one of mutual trust, yet also caution. Bubblegum knew he walked paths of shadow, and though she allowed it, she never ignored the risks. Cinnamon Bun, clumsy yet sincere, tested her patience but also taught her humility. He reminded her that not every creation could be molded to perfection, and that imperfection, too, had its place in her kingdom. Conflicts, however, were not always external. Bubblegum often wrestled with herself. Her love for her people sometimes clashed with her instinct to control them. Her longing for closeness sometimes battled with her fear of vulnerability. In her quietest moments, she must have wondered if she could truly be both a ruler and a friend, both a scientist and a companion. These inner conflicts are what make her story resonate so deeply. They show us a character who is powerful yet uncertain, devoted yet flawed, a figure whose greatest battles are as much within herself as they are in the world beyond. When we step back, we can see how these bonds form the threads of her life. Finn kept her tied to innocence. Marceline pulled her toward vulnerability. Flame Princess reminded her of respect. And her candy citizens reflected her role as both mother and monarch. Each relationship tested her, softened her, sharpened her, and in turn shaped the Candy Kingdom itself. Without them, she might have remained a distant scientist queen. With them, she became something richer, someone whose story is not only about power, but about love, trust, and the difficulties of holding both in balance. The conflicts Bubblegum faced were not always loud or dramatic. Often they unfolded in quiet conversations, in moments of hesitation, in choices made late at night when the city was asleep. When Finn came to her with his heart open, she sometimes pulled away, not out of coldness, but because she knew that her responsibilities left little room for personal attachment. She cared for him deeply, yet she feared what it would mean to accept his love. For Bubblegum, affection was never simple. Every bond came with consequences. Every relationship demanded careful balance. With Marceline, those consequences were even more profound. Their history was littered with misunderstandings. There were times Bubblegum prioritized her kingdom so heavily that Marceline felt abandoned. There were times Marceline's rebellious nature struck at Bubblegum's need for order, leaving her wounded. But even in conflict, they gravitated back toward one another. Music often bridged the distance, as though the melodies they shared carried words they could not bring themselves to speak. In those rare moments of harmony, we see the truth, that beneath their differences lay a bond too strong to break. Outside of these personal ties, Bubblegum's diplomacy demanded constant attention. Negotiating with Flame Princess was never straightforward. The Fire Kingdom's volatility meant every interaction carried risk. Bubblegum sometimes overstepped, using surveillance and manipulation in ways that strained trust. Yet she learned from these missteps. She began to see Flame Princess not as a threat to be managed, but as a ruler worthy of respect. It was a shift that reflected Bubblegum's growth, the willingness to admit when control had gone too far and to step back enough to let others lead. Even with rulers she considered allies, there were tensions. Slime Princess's unpredictable nature and tendency toward chaos often forced Bubblegum to reassert boundaries. The two shared an odd kind of respect, though neither fully trusted the other. With Ice King, the bond was defined by careful distance. She pitied him, understanding the madness that had consumed Simon beneath the crown, but she also knew he was dangerous. Bubblegum treated him with compassion, but never allowed him too close. These choices show her constant balancing act, offering empathy where she could, but never at the expense of her people's safety. Her candy citizens provided another layer of both bond and conflict. They adored her completely, trusting her in every decision, yet their innocence sometimes made them vulnerable. Bubblegum felt compelled to guide every aspect of their lives, convinced that without her constant watchfulness, they would falter. This devotion bordered on control, but it was always rooted in love. The conflicts that arose, whether through Cinnamon Bun's disobedience or Peppermint Butler's secretive practices, were reminders that even within her own creations, unpredictability existed. Bubblegum faced these challenges with patience, though never without the reminder that her power came with limits. Perhaps the most poignant conflict was the one within herself. She longed for closeness, for companionship that would ease her solitude. Yet she feared what vulnerability might cost. Opening her heart could distract her from her duties, and in her mind, distraction could lead to danger. So she held herself apart, pouring her energy into her kingdom, hiding her tenderness behind rules and science. And yet her bonds with Finn, Marceline, and even her candy folk chipped away at this barrier. They reminded her that connection was not weakness. It was a different kind of strength, one that made her sacrifices meaningful. The show often reveals this through small gestures rather than grand declarations. A glance shared with Marceline after a quarrel, a smile given to Finn when he insists on protecting her, a quiet word to Peppermint Butler acknowledging his loyalty despite his secrets. These moments remind us that Bubblegum's story is not one of isolation, but of carefully guarded love. Her bonds may be complicated, sometimes even painful, but they are the foundation of her humanity. By weaving science and relationships together, Bubblegum walked a path that was both rewarding and difficult. Her conflicts shaped her as much as her triumphs, reminding her that even the most brilliant mind cannot exist alone. Every friend, every rival, every creation taught her something new about herself. And though she often resisted vulnerability, she could not escape the truth that her bonds gave her strength in ways her machines never could. In time, the bonds Bubblegum formed came to define her just as much as her science. They revealed the heart behind the crown, showing that she was not only a ruler of candy, but a person shaped by love, trust, and the friction of difference. Each connection, whether fragile or strong, reminded her of the limits of control and the necessity of openness. Her friendship with Finn settled into a steady rhythm, no longer the dream of youthful romance, but a partnership built on trust. Finn learned to see her not as an unreachable figure, but as someone who, like him, carried burdens and made mistakes. Bubblegum, in turn, came to rely on Finn's courage in ways she rarely admitted. His presence reminded her that even in a world of equations and strategies, there was value in heart, in instinct, in simply doing what felt right. Together they balanced one another, their bond, quiet proof that respect can endure even when affection changes shape. With Marceline, the story grew deeper. Their past conflicts softened into understanding, and the tension that once pulled them apart began to ease. In music, in shared laughter, in moments of vulnerability, they rebuilt what had been lost. Their love, complicated and unspoken for so long, blossomed into something undeniable. Bubblegum found in Marceline a companion who could see beyond the princess and the scientist, who could remind her that she was also Bonnibel, a girl with feelings, flaws, and a longing to be known. This bond, tested by centuries, revealed a part of Bubblegum's soul that few others ever touched. Her diplomacy with other rulers matured as well. With Flame Princess, she learned humility, the recognition that her instinct to control could sometimes wound others, and the true respect required trust. With Slime Princess, she learned patience, navigating the chaos with measured grace. Even with the Ice King, she continued to balance empathy and caution, treating him with dignity while never ignoring the danger he carried. Each relationship was a lesson, teaching her that power must be tempered not only by science but by compassion. The candy folk themselves remained at the heart of her life. Their trust was unwavering, their devotion absolute. Though they often did not understand her choices, they loved her without hesitation. Bubblegum, in turn, loved them fiercely. She saw in their laughter the reason for her sleepless nights, in their innocence the proof that her sacrifices were not in vain. Conflicts arose, experiments gone awry, citizens who strayed, but each time she faced them with patience, carrying the weight of responsibility with steady hands. And within herself, Bubblegum continued to wrestle with the greatest conflict of all, the balance between ruler and person. Could she allow herself the vulnerability of love without endangering her kingdom? Could she trust others fully without fear of failure? These questions followed her, but the bonds she nurtured offered answers in their own quiet way. Finn showed her the value of trust. Marceline reminded her of the power of openness. Her citizens reflected the joy that comes from care. Together, they revealed that strength does not only come from control, it also comes from connection. When we look at Bubblegum in this stage of her life, we see a ruler surrounded by bonds that both tested and strengthened her. She is no longer the solitary girl of candy rising from chaos, nor only the scientist buried in her work. She is a leader shaped by friendship, by love, by conflict, and by the delicate threads of connection that tied her to Ooh. Her bonds are imperfect, filled with missteps and misunderstandings, but they are real, and they remind us that even the most brilliant mind and the most cautious heart cannot stand entirely alone. Picture her at the end of a long day, standing on the balcony of her castle as the stars shine above. Around her, the Candy Kingdom sleeps peacefully, its streets glowing faintly in the lantern light. In the distance, Marceline's music drifts across the night, soft and steady. Somewhere in the kingdom, Finn rests after another adventure, dreaming of the next. Her citizens dream, too, safe in the sweetness she has built. And Bubblegum, gazing out over it all, feels both the weight of responsibility and the warmth of love. The conflicts are not gone, but they are balanced by the bonds that sustain her. This is the essence of Bubblegum's story in this chapter. Bonds that complicate, conflicts that refine, and relationships that reveal her heart. They are what make her more than a ruler, more than a scientist. They make her human in the ways that matter most. And as the Candy Kingdom continues to grow, these bonds will remain its foundation, guiding both its princess and her people through the trials yet to come. Peace in the Candy Kingdom was always fragile. Though its streets glowed with sweetness and its people laughed freely, Princess Bubblegum knew better than anyone how thin the veil of safety truly was. The world beyond her walls was restless. Old magic stirred in the shadows, rival rulers guarded their power jealously, and ancient threats sometimes rose without warning. For Bubblegum, the thought of war was never distant. It was a constant, quiet presence in her mind, shaping every decision she made. The first signs of conflict came not from foreign kingdoms, but from the deeper darkness that haunted Ooh. The Lich, embodiment of death and destruction, threatened all life, and even the joy of the Candy Kingdom was not beyond his reach. Bubblegum prepared in silence, her laboratories glowing late into the night, as she studied ways to protect her people from an enemy whose power seemed limitless. While her citizens danced in festivals, she planned strategies, her heart weighed down by the knowledge that safety could vanish in an instant. In those days, her rule took on the edge of steel. Sweetness remained the face of her kingdom, but beneath it, Bubblegum built defenses of remarkable power. She wove hidden weapons into the very walls, designed constructs to react if invaders breached her gates, and trained select Candy citizens in subtle ways of protection. She did not speak openly of war to her people. They were too innocent, too vulnerable, and she wanted their lives to remain light. But she bore the truth alone, ensuring that when danger came, they would not be caught unprepared. When the Lich made his moves against Ooh, Finn and Jake stood at the forefront of battle. But Bubblegum's role was no less vital. She analyzed, she advised, she fortified. Her kingdom became a bastion, a place where plans were drawn and from which strength was lent to the wider struggle. The Lich represented everything she feared: chaos, destruction, the undoing of life itself. Facing him confirmed for her what she had always believed, that vigilance was not paranoia but necessity. The weight of war demanded it. Beyond the shadow of the Lich, other conflicts tested her resolve. Rival kingdoms often looked to the Candy Kingdom with suspicion, wondering how a land so sweet could hold such strength. Bubblegum navigated these tensions with diplomacy when she could. But when diplomacy failed, she did not hesitate to defend her people. The fire that smoldered in the Flame Kingdom, the unpredictability of slime, even the Ice King's erratic actions all were forces she accounted for, sometimes with words, sometimes with weapons hidden just out of sight. The quiet truth is that Bubblegum never desired war, but she accepted its inevitability. To her, love for her people meant preparing for the worst, even if it never came. This preparation aged her spirit. While her candy body never wrinkled, her eyes carried the heaviness of someone who had seen too much, who had shouldered too much. Every tower she built carried not only sweetness but also defense. Every invention held not only wonder but also strategy. The kingdom was beautiful, but it was also a fortress. War did not always arrive in armies. Sometimes it came in betrayal. The rebellion of Lemongrab, the schemes of dark forces, even the experiments that turned against her, each felt like a war on a smaller scale. Bubblegum faced them all with the same resolve, never allowing herself to falter. Yet each conflict left a mark. Each one deepened the quiet lines of responsibility etched into her soul. To her citizens, she remained their steady princess, the figure who always seemed unshaken. But in her solitude, she must have felt the strain. The laughter she protected so carefully often echoed in her ears at night, reminding her of what she stood to lose if she ever failed. That fear did not weaken her. It hardened her resolve, even when it risked hardening her heart. This is the weight of war for Bubblegum. Not just battles fought in the open, but the endless preparation, the sleepless nights, the loneliness of a ruler who bears responsibility for lives too innocent to understand the dangers around them. Her story in this chapter is one of resilience, of a queen who wrapped sweetness around steel, who carried the burdens of conflict so her people could keep dreaming of candy and light. There is a quiet tragedy in the way Bubblegum prepared for battles that her people never saw. To the candy folk, life was a festival of sweets, their days filled with laughter, songs, and the warm comfort of their princess's care. They rarely understood how many of those comforts were born from her sleepless vigilance. Every lantern that lit their streets, every guardian that stood watch, every law she enforced with steady firmness, carried within it the memory of threats she had already imagined, dangers she had already planned for. Her foresight became clearest during times of invasion. More than once, outsiders tried to claim the Candy Kingdom, mistaking its sweetness for weakness. Yet when they breached the gates, they found not only smiling citizens, but defenses meticulously designed to repel them. Bubblegum rarely raised a weapon herself, but her inventions did the work of armies. Machines hidden in the walls, alchemical traps woven into the streets. Even the gumball guardians, towering silently at the edges of the city, all responded with precision. These moments revealed the truth that her kingdom was never simply a paradise. It was a fortress disguised in candy colors, born from her refusal to leave her people exposed. The battles against Lemongrab were smaller in scale but no less telling. His rebellion was not an invasion from beyond the walls, but from within her own creations. Bubblegum faced him not with cruelty, but with resolve. Each time he lashed out, she sought to repair rather than destroy, to guide rather than abandon. Yet the conflict weighed on her heavily. Lemon Grab was her responsibility, her mistake to correct, and his suffering became another layer of war she carried in her heart. For Bubblegum, the battlefield was not only the world outside, but also the unintended consequences of her own experiments. War also demanded alliances. Bubblegum understood that her kingdom could not stand entirely alone. She forged careful ties with other rulers, each alliance shaped by caution and compromise. With Flame Princess, she worked to temper destruction with respect. With Slime Princess, she learned to navigate chaos with patience. Even with rulers she distrusted, Bubblegum sought dialogue before conflict, always preferring diplomacy when possible. But her diplomacy was never naive. She spoke with the calm of someone who knew that, if words failed, she had already prepared for the alternative. And yet, preparation took its toll. Her citizens celebrated her brilliance, but they did not see the cost. They did not see the weariness in her eyes after nights spent refining formulas for weapons she hoped never to use. They did not see the weight on her shoulders when she sent Finn and Jake into danger, trusting that their bravery would protect not only her kingdom, but the world beyond. They did not hear the silence of her private chambers, where she stood alone with the knowledge that, if she ever faltered, her people would pay the price. The weight of war shaped her not only as a ruler, but as a person. It hardened her edges, sometimes making her appear cold or distant. It taught her to guard her heart as carefully as her kingdom. For love could be a distraction, a vulnerability that enemies might exploit. Yet it also deepened her compassion. Every Candy citizen, no matter how clumsy or simple, mattered to her. Every festival she joined, every smile she shared was a reminder of why she carried the burdened all. Adventure Time often shows us glimpses of these battles, but it also invites us to imagine the countless unseen wars Bubblegum prevented. How many threats never reached the gates because of her foresight? How many lives remained untouched by conflict because she planned far in advance? This is the unseen weight of her crown, not only fighting wars, but preventing them so thoroughly that her people never realized how close danger had come. And through it all, Bubblegum remained steady. She did not falter, even when the conflicts tested her deeply. She bore the scars quietly, wearing them not on her body, but in the careful lines of her choices. To her citizens, she was their perfect princess, sweet figure who never let them see how heavy the world truly was. To herself, she was a soldier of a different kind, one who fought with foresight, who built with strategy, who loved so fiercely that she was willing to carry every burden alone. The deeper we look into Bubblegum's story, the more we see that war for her was not just about armies or invasions. It was about vigilance, about the 1,000 small decisions that shaped whether her people remained safe. To her, every invention was a shield, every law a precaution, every guarded secret a piece of strategy. She lived in a state of constant readiness, not because she craved conflict, but because she could not bear the thought of her citizens suffering. When the Lich threatened Ooh, the Candy Kingdom was more than a bystander. Bubblegum's calculations and preparations gave Finn and Jake a foundation for their heroism. Though she rarely stood on the front lines, her contributions were woven into the victories of others. She embodied a different kind of warrior, one who fought not with blades, but with foresight. Her science was her sword, her intellect her armor. Without her, many of the battles fought in Ooh might never have been won. Even in moments when her defenses were tested, Bubblegum revealed her resilience. When enemies breached her walls or when chaos swept through the kingdom, she remained calm. Panic never reached her voice. She guided her people with a steadiness that reassured them, even when danger loomed. That calm was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. She bore her fear alone, translating it into action, into plans that transformed uncertainty into safety. Yet the burden of constant conflict left her isolated. War demanded secrecy. She could not always explain to her citizens why she made certain choices, why she created weapons hidden beneath their streets, why she sometimes withheld truths even from her closest allies. To her, openness felt dangerous. The fewer who knew, the safer they all were. But secrecy also bred distance. Friends questioned her trust. Citizens could not understand her caution. And even her allies sometimes mistook her vigilance for manipulation. These misunderstandings were the price of her resolve, the invisible wounds of her wars. There is poetry in the way Adventure Time shows her carrying these burdens. The sweetness of the Candy Kingdom never vanishes, even in the darkest times. The festivals continue, the laughter echoes, the candy citizens live as though danger is far away. That joy is not ignorance. It is the very thing Bubblegum fights for. She ensures that their innocence can survive, that their laughter is louder than the sound of battle. To them, the world feels safe because their princess has already fought the war before it ever reached them. But not every conflict could be contained. There were times when war reached her gates, when the Candy Kingdom trembled under threat. Each of these moments tested her resolve and reminded her of the fragility of peace. Yet even in defeat or setback, Bubblegum adapted. She never stopped building, never stopped learning, never stopped strengthening her defenses. The cycle of war and recovery became a rhythm she knew by heart, one that left her spirit tired but never broken. The weight of war also shaped her relationships. It explained the distance she sometimes kept from Finn, the guardedness she showed Marceline, the control she exerted over her citizens. She feared that if she allowed herself to relax, if she allowed herself to simply be, the world might fall apart around her. Love was precious, but it could be a distraction. Friendship was valuable, but it could be a vulnerability. War taught her that everything she cherished could also be used against her, and so even as she cared deeply, she armored her heart just as carefully as her kingdom. Yet beneath that armor, the love remained. Bubblegum's harshest choices were born from it. When she built weapons, it was because she loved her people too much to leave them defenseless. When she kept secrets, it was because she could not bear to risk their safety on trust alone. When she appeared cold or calculating, it was because she carried the knowledge of how much there was to lose. This is the paradox of her character, that war made her seem distant, yet it also revealed the depth of her devotion. By the time the Candy Kingdom matured into one of the most stable nations of all, Bubblegum had already weathered countless conflicts. Some were great battles, others were small but painful rebellions, still others were silent wars fought entirely in her laboratories. Each one added to the quiet lines of responsibility written into her soul. Each one reminded her that peace was never permanent. It had to be nurtured, guarded, rebuilt again and again. And still she endured. She stood tall in her pink robes, her crown gleaming faintly, her eyes carrying the heaviness of someone who had seen far too much, but who refused to falter. To her candy citizens, she was their eternal protector, the princess, who never let them see the war she had already fought for them. To herself, she was a ruler who bore every weight so that others could remain light. This was the essence of the war she carried. Unseen, relentless, and fueled by love. There is a certain stillness in the way Princess Bubblegum carried her wars. Unlike warriors who returned scarred and triumphant, she bore her battles in silence, her victories invisible, her scars hidden in choices rather than wounds. To her people, she seemed untouched, unchanging, a constant presence of sweetness. But inside, the weight grew heavier. Every conflict prevented, every threat defeated, every betrayal endured added another stone to the quiet burden she carried alone. The clearest proof of this lies in the way she built her kingdom. The Candy Kingdom was more than a home. It was a shield. Each tower doubled as a lookout. Each wall was lined with defenses disguised in decoration. Even the cheerful design of her citizens with their bright colors and simple laughter was a strategic choice. By creating a society of innocence, she also created a constant reminder of why her vigilance mattered. The purity of their joy was the very thing she fought to preserve. And yet, the preservation of innocence came at a cost. War forced Bubblegum to become both protector and manipulator. She guided her people like a mother, but she also withheld truths like a strategist. She could not tell them everything, for to know the depth of danger would strip away the innocence she fought for. This balance defined her reign, giving her people joy, while silently carrying the shadow of fear herself. When greater wars erupted across Ooo, Bubblegum's choices often shaped the outcome. She lent her wisdom, her science, her strategies, sometimes quietly, sometimes decisively. Though she rarely took the battlefield in person, her presence was felt in every plan, every invention, every careful preparation that allowed heroes like Finn and Jake to succeed. She was not the sword in the fight, but she was the foundation that made victory possible. The show presents this subtly, but when we reflect on it, the truth becomes clear. Without Bubblegum's foresight, many of the greatest threats to Ooo might have ended in despair. Her defenses held back invasions, her calculations countered dark magic, her unyielding resolve kept her people standing when chaos threatened to consume them. She was the quiet general of unseen wars, shaping outcomes without ever needing recognition. This role, however, deepened her isolation. Few could understand what it meant to always be ready for battle, to plan for dangers no one else could see. Friends sometimes mistook her caution for coldness. Citizens mistook her secrecy for distance. Even Marceline, who knew her best, sometimes struggled to accept the walls Bubblegum built around her heart. But those walls were not built from pride. They were built from necessity. The only way she knew to ensure that when war came, she would be strong enough to face it. It is here that the image of her as both scientist and queen merges with the image of her as warrior. She fought not with blood and fire, but with sleepless nights, with careful invention, with love that took the form of vigilance. Her weapons were her machines, her formulas, her guardians of stone and candy. Her victories were measured not in trophies, but in laughter that continued uninterrupted above her laboratories. And yet she never allowed the weight of war to strip her of tenderness. Even in her sternest moments, she loved her people deeply. She joined their festivals, shared their meals, smiled at their songs. These gestures, small as they seemed, were victories in themselves. They proved that war had not broken her spirit, that her devotion had not turned into despair. Her ability to nurture joy, even while carrying so much responsibility, reveals the resilience that defines her story. When we imagine her at the close of this chapter, the image is serene yet powerful. The Candy Kingdom glows softly under lantern light. Citizens laugh and rest, unaware of how close danger may have once been. And high above them, in her castle, Bubblegum stands watch. Her eyes scan the horizon, her mind already calculating, already preparing for the wars that may never come. She does not rest, because she cannot. Her rest comes only in knowing that her people sleep safely. This is the weight of war for Princess Bubblegum. It is not the glory of battle, but the endless burden of preparation. It is the willingness to carry fear alone so that others may live without it. It is the balance of sweetness and steel, of love that manifests not in words but in vigilance. And though it aged her spirit, though it deepened her solitude, it also revealed the strength of her devotion. She was, above all, a protector. And in the quiet, unseen wars of Ooh, no protector was more steadfast than the Princess of Candy. When we reach the later chapters of Princess Bubblegum's story, the question of legacy quietly comes to the surface. For so long she lived in the present, solving problems before they reached her gates, preparing for wars that might never come, building and rebuilding her kingdom piece by piece. But even the most vigilant rulers eventually pause to look back and wonder, what remains after the battles, the experiments, the sleepless nights? What will endure beyond the life of the princess herself? For Bubblegum, legacy is written not in monuments, but in lives. Every Candy citizen who walks the glowing streets of her kingdom carries a piece of her essence. She created them, nurtured them, protected them, and in their laughter echoes the story of her reign. They are her living legacy, proof that her devotion gave rise to a community that would outlast any single ruler. To them, she is not only their princess. She is their origin, their mother, their reason for being. The bond, unbreakable and eternal, is perhaps the most profound testament to her life's work. Yet her legacy stretches beyond the candy folk. Bubblegum shaped the politics of Ooh itself. Her voice was respected among rulers, her counsel sought even by those who distrusted her methods. Through diplomacy, through science, through her unwavering resolve, she ensured that her kingdom was not only safe, but also vital in the balance of power across the land. Long after her experiments are forgotten, the stability she brought to Ooh will remain part of her story. There is also her personal legacy, the bonds she forged that reached beyond politics and science. Finn, the boy who once adored her, grew into a hero in his own right, carrying lessons learned from her guidance. Marceline, the companion of centuries, stood by her side through loss and reconciliation, their love deepening into something timeless. These relationships reveal that Bubblegum's story is not only about rule and responsibility. It is about connection, about the ways she allowed herself, however cautiously, to be touched by others. That, too, is legacy, not what she built with her hands, but what she left in the hearts of those who knew her. As the years passed, Bubblegum came to embody a paradox. She remained eternally youthful in body, yet ancient in spirit. Her candy form did not wrinkle, did not fade, yet her eyes carried centuries of experience. This timelessness added to her legend. To the candy folk, she was their everlasting protector. To outsiders, she was a figure who seemed to defy time itself. And with each passing year, the question of what she represented grew larger. She was not only Bonnie Bell Bubblegum, not only a scientist or a queen. She was an idea, a symbol of resilience and creation in a world born from ruin. Adventure Time shows us glimpses of her reflecting on this, though never in dramatic speeches. Legacy for Bubblegum is quieter, found in small moments when she allows herself to soften, watching her people sleep peacefully, smiling as Marceline's song drifts through the night, standing beside Finn and seeing him no longer as a boy chasing affection, but as a man shaped by his own choices. These moments are her reward, subtle reminders that the sacrifices she carried have borne fruit. Her story also reminds us that legacy is not perfection. She made mistakes, sometimes great ones. She overreached. She controlled too tightly. She created lives that suffered because of flaws in her experiments. Yet even these mistakes are part of her legacy because they reveal the truth of her character. She was not flawless, but she never turned away from responsibility. She bore her errors with the same resolve that she bore her triumphs, always striving to do better, to learn, to rebuild. In the end, the legacy of the Candy Queen is not carved into stone, nor written in ancient books. It lives in the sweetness of her people's joy, in the stability of her kingdom, in the love she finally allowed herself to share. It lives in the quiet strength of a ruler who carried more than anyone should, and who, despite her burdens, never ceased to nurture life. To understand Bubblegum's legacy, we must also look at how she was perceived by those who stood beside her. Finn often spoke of her with admiration, even when their paths diverged. He saw her not as a flawless monarch, but as someone who held a strength beyond her years. His growth as a hero was shaped by her example. She taught him patience, responsibility, and the importance of foresight, lessons that lingered long after his childhood crush faded. In this way, her legacy reached beyond her kingdom, shaping the next generation of protectors. Marceline's perspective added another layer. Their bond, strained and repaired over centuries, showed how legacy is not only about the grand acts of rule, but also about the private threads of love that endure through time. Marceline knew Bubblegum not just as the Queen of Candy, but as Bonnabelle, the girl who once laughed with her, argued with her, hurt her, and healed with her. For Marceline, Bubblegum's legacy was deeply personal. It was the story of a companion who finally chose openness over distance, affection over fear. That decision, as quiet as it seemed, echoed louder than any scientific invention or political triumph. Even the rulers of other kingdoms recognized her mark. Flame Princess, who once bristled under Bubblegum's surveillance, eventually came to acknowledge her respect. Slime Princess, chaotic as she was, treated Bubblegum as a steady counterbalance. Even Ice King, lost in his madness, carried a strange kind of reverence for her. Each of these relationships reveals how Bubblegum's influence extended beyond the Candy Kingdom. She was not merely one ruler among many. She was the axis around which so much of Oo's balance turned. Her citizens, however, carried the clearest testament to her reign. They adored her unconditionally, often too simple-minded to question the weight she carried for them. To the Candy folk, she was not only their leader, but their protector, their mother, their very reason for existence. They sang her praises, they obeyed her laws, they celebrated her with festivals of light and color. Though they did not understand the lengths she went to in order to keep them safe, their devotion showed that her sacrifices were not in vain. Their joy, their laughter, their innocence, this was the living proof of her legacy. And yet, legacy is never without shadow. Bubblegum's greatest flaw was her desire for control, a flaw that left scars even as it ensured safety. Lemongrab's suffering, her secrecy, her tendency to manipulate events from behind the scenes, these are reminders that her legacy is complicated. It is not one of simple perfection, but of complexity. She left behind a kingdom that thrived, but also questions about the cost of stability. Was her control a gift or a burden? Did her love sometimes cross the line into possession? These questions linger, shaping how we interpret her story. But perhaps the greatest mark of her legacy lies in her resilience. The world of Oo was born from chaos, and yet she built within it a kingdom of sweetness and light. She faced ancient evils, unstable creations, and rival rulers, and still her people endured. Few could claim such constancy. Few could balance love and science, order and freedom, fear and hope the way she did. Her legacy is not the absence of mistakes, but the persistence of devotion through them. As the series draws toward its end, we see Bubblegum in moments of rare vulnerability, where the weight of centuries rests gently on her shoulders. Yet we also see her smile, softer now, more willing to share herself with others. That willingness, that small but profound shift, might be her greatest legacy of all. It proves that even the most guarded hearts can change, that even rulers who carry the heaviest burdens can still find space for love. When we think of the Candy Queen's legacy, we see both sides, the fortress and the festival, the steel and the sweetness. Her life was never one or the other, but both, intertwined in a delicate balance. And it is in that balance that her story finds its meaning. Legacy in Bubblegum's story is not a single moment, but a collection of quiet choices, strung together like beads on a thread. Each decision, whether celebrated or questioned, became part of the larger tapestry of who she was. Her people did not see the long night she spent bent over equations or the ethical knots she wrestled with in solitude. What they saw was the result, a kingdom that stood when others faltered, a home that never lost its light. One of the most remarkable aspects of her legacy is how it bridges past and future. Bubblegum was born from chaos, a fragment of candy essence given form in the strange aftermath of the Mushroom War. Yet from that origin of instability, she built stability. She took a fragment of randomness and turned it into a society of joy. This transformation is itself a legacy, a reminder that even in a broken world, life can begin anew, and sweetness can rise from destruction. But she did not stop with her own era. Her careful planning, her tireless inventions, her creation of candy folk all looked ahead. She built not just for her own lifetime, but for generations that would follow. In this way, her legacy is not confined to the present. It stretches into the future, promising that the kingdom will remain even when she herself is gone. Her immortality is not in her candy body, but in the community she shaped. Her legacy is also evident in the way Ooh itself changed around her. Other rulers adapted to her presence, learning from her balance of compassion and control. Heroes like Finn and Jake drew strength from her example, fighting with both courage and strategy. Even enemies shaped themselves in opposition to her, proving that her influence reached beyond her borders. In this sense, her legacy is written not only in those who loved her, but in those who struggled against her, for all were forced to reckon with the steadiness of the Candy Queen. We also see her legacy in the symbolism she carried. Bubblegum became more than a character. She became a symbol of maternal care, of scientific pursuit, of protective love. For her candy folk, she was the image of safety. For Finn, she was a guide. For Marceline, she was a companion who reminded her of the possibility of trust. In these reflections, Bubblegum's story becomes larger than herself. She stands for the idea that leadership is both a burden and a gift, both a sacrifice and an act of devotion. And yet, her legacy cannot be told without acknowledging her flaws. The lessons of Lemongrab remain a shadow in her story, a creation born from good intention but twisted by imbalance. Her tendency to manipulate, to withhold truths, to treat others as pieces on a board rather than as equals, also lingers as part of her history. These choices do not erase her love, but they complicate her legacy, making it richer and more real. They remind us that leadership is never pure, that even the best intentions can lead to pain. It is in this complexity that her legacy shines brightest. She was not a saint, nor a tyrant. She was something in between a ruler who loved too deeply to let go, who feared too much to stand idle, who controlled because she could not bear to see harm. This duality is what makes her lasting influence meaningful. It shows that legacy is not about perfection, but about persistence, about the willingness to keep trying, even when the path is uncertain. In the final arcs of Adventure Time, we see glimpses of how others will remember her. Her citizens never waver in their devotion. Finn remembers her with respect and affection. Marceline holds her close, finally able to trust the love that had always lingered between them. These reflections confirm that Bubblegum's legacy is not only in the structure she built, but in the lives she touched. She will be remembered not just as a scientist or a queen, but as someone who gave herself fully to her people, and at last allowed herself to give to those she loved. When we look upon the image of her standing in her Candy Kingdom spires, glowing pink under a sky of stars, citizens at peace beneath her care, we see a legacy written, not in stone or song, but in sweetness. She took chaos and made it gentle. She took burden and made it light for others. She carried fear so that others could rest. That is the inheritance she leaves behind, and it is one that will echo in ooh for as long as the Candy Kingdom stands. In the quiet of her later years, when the battles had slowed and the kingdoms of Au had found a fragile balance, Princess Bubblegum's legacy could finally be seen with clearer eyes. No longer was she only the vigilant scientist, forever bent over her equations, or the unyielding monarch, forever preparing for threats that might never come. She became, instead, a figure of continuity, a thread that connected the chaos of the past with the hope of the future. The Candy Kingdom stood as her greatest creation. Its streets, alive with laughter and festivals, bore the mark of her devotion. Each citizen, no matter how small, carried her care within them. They did not remember the battles she had fought, the sleepless nights she endured, or the countless calculations that kept them safe. They only knew joy, comfort, and belonging, and that was enough. For Bubblegum, that was always the goal, to shoulder the weight so her people could remain light. Her influence extended far beyond her borders. Heroes like Finn and Jake would always look back on her as a guiding figure, someone who taught them responsibility and resilience. Rulers like Flame Princess and Slime Princess carried lessons learned through their clashes and compromises with her. Even Marceline, whose bond with Bubblegum spanned centuries of conflict and reconciliation, would remember her not only as a queen, but as a companion whose love endured through everything. Each of these connections carried a piece of her legacy forward, woven into the stories of others. Her flaws, too, became part of the inheritance she left behind. She would be remembered as someone who sometimes controlled too tightly, who made mistakes that hurt those she cared for, who struggled to balance love and duty. Yet these flaws did not diminish her legacy. They deepened it. They made her story human, even when her candy form seemed eternal. They showed that even those who protect with the purest of intentions must navigate imperfection, and that true leadership lies not in avoiding mistakes, but in owning them. Adventure Time leaves us with the sense that Bubblegum's legacy is not static, not carved in stone. It continues to live, to grow, to ripple outward in the lives of those she touched. It is found in Marceline's music, which carries echoes of their shared history. It is found in Finn's courage, which bears the imprint of her lessons. It is found in every candy citizen who wakes to a kingdom that still glows with sweetness, because their queen never stopped caring for them. There is a beauty in imagining her future. Perhaps one day, long after she herself has faded, the Candy Kingdom will still stand, its spires glowing pink against the sky. Perhaps children will play in its streets, unaware of the countless sacrifices that built their safety. And perhaps, somewhere in the heart of the kingdom, her name will be whispered with love, remembered not only as a ruler, but as the mother of candy itself. That is the essence of her legacy, to create life that endures, to nurture joy that outlasts sorrow, to prove that even in a world born from ruin, sweetness can survive. So as we close this story of Princess Bubblegum, we are left with an image both powerful and tender. A ruler who carried the weight of war but never let it harden her entirely. A scientist who created life, not only for knowledge, but for love. A queen who was also a friend, a companion, a protector. Her legacy is as vast as Ooh itself, but it can be felt most clearly in the simple laughter of her people, in the resilience of the kingdom she built, and in the bonds she finally allowed herself to cherish. And now, dear listener, with her story softly resting in your mind, it is time to let the weight of the day slip away. Imagine the Candy Kingdom under the stars, its towers glowing gently, its citizens asleep in perfect peace. Picture Princess Bubblegum on her balcony, watching over them, her eyes calm at last. The night is safe, the kingdom is steady, and her legacy continues in every quiet breath of Ooh. Good night,